It's the 20th anniversary next year for CPHI in Pingmei, China.
Happy birthday, CPHI China. See you in 2020.
Happy birthday, CPHI China.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, CPHI China.
Happy birthday, CPHI China.
Happy anniversary to CPHI China, 20 years of celebrating innovation and success.
Congratulations on 20 years of CPHI and PMEC China.
Happy birthday to CPHI and PMEC China for its 20th anniversary. Come next year because we will party.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jim Fries from RX360. I'm incredibly appreciative about the opportunity to speak with everyone today on a subject that's really come to the forefront here during the most recent global pandemic of coronavirus or COVID-19. As we begin, I really hope and wish that everyone is safe and healthy during this time. And as I always say to our membership here at RX360, if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out to me. As we go through the presentation today, I'll take my time. I'll make strategic pauses to allow anyone that's taking notes to actually also take a breather so you can follow along. I know this world of virtual conferences that we've become used to, I guess, over the last few months really has put us in a position of listening more, allowing us to slow down. And I want to make sure that I give everyone the opportunity to really absorb the information. And at the end of the presentation, you'll have all my contact information. If you have any questions, you'd like to be able to get back to me, we can start a dialogue that way. So again, thank you very much for taking the time to log in and view the presentation. And also, before I begin, I want to thank all the people at CPHI China for this wonderful opportunity. So to begin, what we're going to talk about today is kind of the model of remote auditing. I think when we look at quality initiatives across all of our organizations, we've always had a piece of the puzzle that has been that idea of remote auditing. But what we haven't had is the focus that really over the course of the last 3 or 4 months has really come to fruition in our industry. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about the idea of remote auditing, what it is, build a foundation for you, and really be able to put you in a position, if you haven't already integrated it into your environment, the ability to do that, plus then the ability to maybe look at different best practices. Some of the things we'll be covering is actually what is a remote audit. What I've noticed is that people interchange the word remote audit and virtual audit. So we'll touch on that a little bit. We'll look at some of the benefits and challenges. You know, in many cases, we've lived in a world where on-site audits were the way to go. And I want to take a look at what the benefits of remote audits are, what the benefits of some of the on-site audits are, and then kind of look at those differences. The process of conducting a remote audit, again, something that I think is going to vary from organization to organization. And really what I want to try to do here today is put you in a position of having some examples of how to do things. Throughout the presentation, I'll try to give a little bit of a picture of what it means from a supplier standpoint and also what it means from a manufacturer standpoint. One of the common themes that I'm going to leave you with that you'll hear throughout the entire day is when conducting a remote audit and looking at suppliers and manufacturers, the idea of communication is incredibly important. If those entities are communicating well with the auditor, with the auditee, it becomes much easier and set up for success. We'll touch base at the end on some best practice ideas. This is an evolving, kind of model. So best practices today may change next month as we continue to learn more, having more examples of what works, what doesn't work. So the idea of best practices in remote auditing to me at this point is kind of a living document, and it's something that will really kind of continue to upgrade as we move along. And then I'll end you with a case study. I'm a big believer that you kind of learn by seeing how other people do things. So here at RX360, we have started to do remote audits. It's a model that we worked on a lot over the last couple months. I'll give you some examples of some of the things that we're doing. So again, I'll take pauses throughout so you can catch up, take notes, and then again be able to reach out to me after the presentation in regards to any questions or comments, interaction that you'd like to have. So one of the big questions I always get is, what is a remote audit? You know, what is it from a foundational perspective? But one of the things that became very clear to me early on was the idea of remote audits and virtual audits. And in many cases, people interchange those terms. And, you know, listen, I'm going to say that maybe interchanging those terms is fine if everybody's on the same page, but sometimes we're not. And so I think it's good to understand, you know, maybe some of the foundational definitions that are out there in the industry. And when I look at kind of, you know, ISO 9001 and some other guidance documents that are out there in regards to defining remote audits, what I've noticed is the common definitions that I see are really kind of a remote audit definition that's, I don't want to say more general, but it's really the use of using information and communication technologies really to replace an on-site audit or a face-to-face method with kind of almost like a fact-finding mission that allows you to check those compliance boxes, that allows you to do those things that you need to make sure that you have that documentation and that fact-finding around being able to, again, use the same term, check the box that supplier is appropriate for your organization. And then there is the idea of the virtual audit. And the best way I can describe it is, in many cases, a virtual audit is actually the components of an audit, but you're doing it maybe in a set up environment, whether it's through you know, different portals, whether it's through you know, reviewing software, hardware, those type of things, automated devices such as, you know, to use a technology that I think we've all heard of before, maybe like the Google Glass or something like that. That's when you get into more of that virtual environment rather than a true remote audit. But for the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to be using the term remote audit, and I am going to be looking at the concept of using those information technologies and communication technologies to, for lack of a better term, replace the on-site audit. And why is that important when we talk about it? And is, you know, again, living in the world right now of coronavirus and COVID-19, travel restrictions have really started to play a big part in our environment, whether it's governmental travel restrictions or whether it's organizational or company travel restrictions. And because of that, we've needed to lean towards the remote audit to be able to check those compliance boxes. Because let's face it, our industry is not slowing down, and this is a way to keep that, for lack of a better term, warp speed moving forward. You know, one of the things that I think people are challenged with when they start thinking about remote audits within their organization is the idea of benefits. You know, you always look at things in a standpoint of, hey, why is this going to work for me? And why is this important for my organization? You know, I'm a big questioner, so you might look at it like, well, are there other alternatives? And when you look at the benefits of remote audits, there's a lot. But to me, the one big thing when we deal with today, okay, is the idea of, again, coronavirus, COVID-19, and travel. And if you have the opportunity to continue to reach your audit objectives by replacing remote audits with an on-site audit due to travel restrictions, it's a huge plus. You know, I think on the back end, when we start to come out of coronavirus and we start, you know, kind of living a little bit in a new world, but Remote audits are not going to go away. So then you start thinking about how remote audits can help in budgets and annual budgets that you have wrapped around auditing. I mean, let's face it, all of organizations spend a tremendous amount of money in the world of auditing, and this possibly is a way to help those budgets out, to allow you to still reach compliance checklist and those type of things, especially when it maybe comes to secondary suppliers rather than your primary suppliers. It may help in budgets as we come out of COVID-19. Obviously, when you look at scheduling, execution, a lot of that is simplified. Again, it leads though back to the idea of no travel. I mean, you're not dealing with hotel reservations. You're not dealing with plane reservations. There's some real flexibility in the schedule, and really when you take a look at it, there in some cases it can be more efficient because, as you'll see as I get through this presentation a little bit, there's an opportunity for more preparation. And the more preparation you do, especially when it comes to document gathering, is incredibly important when you look at it from an efficiency standpoint. So when I look at benefits overall, I think in terms of obviously travel, budgets, but then when you look at flexibility, when you look at prep work, it really sets up for a successful audit. There's always the flip side too, right? We talk about benefits, but in the same light, we also have to look at the idea of what challenges are. What do we have to have our red flag up about? What do we have to pay attention to? And for me, a lot of it has to do with, what are the limitations that we are going to now encounter when doing a remote audit that we otherwise wouldn't have in an on-site audit. You're not going to have that ability to walk around. You're not going to have the ability to maybe even check all the boxes. I'll get into a little bit later, but it's the idea of, can you even do a remote audit and cover 100% of the items that you want to cover, or do you have to look at it from a concept of, hey, I can cover 80% of the things that I need, right now via remote. But maybe when travel restrictions are eased and things start to open back up, I may still have to go back on site. So that's something you're also going to have to look at when dealing with remote audits, is make an assessment of can you do it all 100% remote, or does it have to be a mixture? And let's face it, I think a mixture is sometimes going to be necessary, but also sometimes might be limiting when you look at it from a standpoint of potentially having to go back out on site. You're talking about an increased timeline of really finalizing that audit report. So there's a lot of issues around not being able to do it 100% of the time that are important for us to consider. Listen, remote audits may also not work for every type of audit that you want to do. And as you'll see as part of the process that we talk about later in the presentation, especially when we get into the case study, is you'll see that there needs to be preparation work around the audit checklist that you're going to be using, or the audit standard, whatever term you want to use, and look at it from a perspective of, can I cover all these things that are in my current checklist? Can I cover all my needs? Or will the audit itself have to be scaled back a little bit? One of the things that I urge you to do is, if you look at that audit checklist and it needs to be scaled back, make sure that you're making that assessment that with a scaled back version of the checklist, do you still meet your needs? Because ultimately, you need to be able to meet those needs to be compliant, whether by your own rules or by regulatory agency rules. So pay attention to the scaling back of any audit checklists. And then really, if you are doing it from a regulator perspective, make sure that they're accepting of the remote audit. Again, we always talk about expenses and budgets and that type of thing. Don't go down the don't go down the road of a remote audit if you don't know exactly why you're doing it, and you don't have a full understanding that it checks that compliance box. So make sure you validate that before you start. And then probably the last thing is, and again, this will be covered later on in the presentation, but it's incredibly important for everybody involved in the remote audit, and this can be a challenge at times, to agree upon the communication portal that will be used, whether it's an IT type of situation, whatever it might be. You need to make sure that the supplier and the manufacturer, you and the person that you're auditing or vice versa, are all on the same page in regards to what type of portal that you're going to use. Is it secure? Is it in a confidential manner? Does it meet everyone's needs? I don't think that the idea of remote auditing and a communication portal can be a dictator type of situation. It really needs to be a collaborative communication between everybody involved in the audit to make sure everybody's on the same page in regards to what's going to work for this particular audit. So again, that's kind of a review of very quickly on some challenges when it comes to remote audits, as well as the previous slide benefits. One of the things that people also ask me when we talk about remote audits is we're sitting here having a conversation about remote audits, but what we're forgetting about is there is this on-site audit that's not going away and will probably eventually be coming back. And there's challenges in that too, right? There's upsides to on-site audits, there's upsides to remote audits. And I wanted to make sure that we did take a look at what some of those are. And again, when you look at this chart that I found helpful to me in my research, is it all comes down to travel again. When you look at the advantages, when you look at the disadvantages, on both ends of the spectrum, whether it's audits on site or whether it's audits via remote, travel, that scheduling, that importance of bandwidth time really plays a huge role when looking at both the on-site audit and the remote audit. One comment that I do want to make in regards to on-site versus remote is we know that one of the challenges that's out there right now, especially on the supplier end, is being able to find enough calendar days in our annual calendar to be able to support remote audits. Everybody wants to come in, or not support remote audits, but to support on-site audits. Everybody wants to come in and do an on-site audit. There's just not enough time in many cases. I talked to some suppliers and their calendar year's filled up and they still have requests. So the idea of remote audits may be able to shift some of that bandwidth. So to me, that's a potential huge advantage to remote auditing when we come out of the idea of coronavirus, not so much the idea, but the reality of coronavirus or COVID-19, is maintaining some part of our audit menu as remote. Not only could it help you in regards to, from a manufacturer perspective, with meeting your compliance objectives in regards to timing, but also from a supplier perspective, really help out their bandwidth in being able to host on-site audits. So again, it's something that I want everybody to think about. Is, to me, the idea of remote audit is not a one-shot deal where during the global pandemic we're going to be doing remote audits, and when the global pandemic is done, then we're going to go back to our traditional way of doing on-site audits. I would recommend that there's probably going to be a nice mixture of both on the back end. So again, those are some advantages of and disadvantages. Again, I'll also repeat, at the end, you'll get my email. You'll be able to send me any questions that you might have. I will also be able to supply this deck to anybody that wants it. But again, it's an ongoing dialogue. We talked about best practices and the idea of that. It's going to continue to change. Things are going to continue to improve as we learn more about this model. So now that we've kind of gone through some of the benefits, some of the challenges, kind of built a little bit of that foundation and got us thinking around, okay, is this a good thing? I want to talk more about the actual process and the conducting of a remote audit. I'm going to give you some examples of some of the things that I've seen, but really every organization that is conducting remote audits, they may have different needs, and I don't want to these are my thoughts, but there may be other thoughts that people have in regards to what works. And one thing that I will say is that industry working together from a best practice perspective is without a doubt the best way to come up with what's best for you. But when I look at the process of conducting a remote audit. Probably the most important piece of the puzzle is that pre-audit work, whether it's a pre-audit questionnaire where the manufacturer is getting answers from a supplier on some early items that they might need, whether it's documents, looking at previous CAPAs, really kind of understanding what the audit checklist is going to look like. I mentioned it early, but determining those IT needs beyond important. If you don't have an agreed upon communication portal that is secure, confidential, it's a non-starter. The remote audit truly kind of won't work for anybody. So incredibly important to understand, determine, and make a decision collaboratively on what type of portal you'll use to exchange information. And then other ideas that I've seen that people want to see during this pre-audit stage is, taking a look at quality manuals, taking a look at procedures, complaint logs. I already mentioned CAPAs. These are the type of things that can be done actually before the quote true remote audit starts, that not only saves money and time, but also gives a better understanding of what we're dealing with when it comes to this type of an audit. The other thing I think is important is understanding, since you are remote, you're not on site, maybe being able to share a facility map. Again, helps in the concept of where things are, helps in the concept of maybe where you want to steer the remote. But a facility map is incredibly important. People that I work with on a daily basis at RX360, they know me well from the standpoint that I'm a big kind of paint me a picture type of person, and having a facility map is that concept of paint a picture for the person that's doing the audit, and allow them to see what they're dealing with. So again, that's kind of some of the ideas around pre-work or pre-audit preparation. Incredibly important, because without these things, you're not going to be able to move forward in a successful manner. When we then talk about the process and going from that pre-audit work to the actual doing, I mean, some of the key things I want to mention, again, I'm not going to say it enough, and I hope it's the one thing maybe that you take away from this presentation, is the idea of two-way communication. Making sure that you're talking, whether it's through an opening meeting where you're kind of laying out, hey, this is what we're going to do within the remote audit. We talked about the difference between virtual and remote, but will there be a tour, a virtual tour incorporated into the audit at all? The idea of making sure you get that robust records review in regards to the area that you're looking at. The checklist, we talked about it, but I want to touch on it again here. It's the idea of making sure that your audit checklist is aligned with the remote capabilities. It may not always be synonymous with what you are able to do when you're on site. So please, collaboratively between the auditee, the auditor, make sure you're reviewing that checklist, that it meets everybody's needs. It's just something that you don't want to get into a remote audit and recognize halfway through that you're not going to be able to check all of your boxes. So please make sure that that checklist review is completed as part of the process. Follow-up is going to be very important. Not that it's not important in an on-site audit, but I just think it's ramped up a little bit from a remote perspective, because you're constantly in that situation of painting a picture, being proactive. The idea of communication really goes through the roof. So please make sure that you really almost have a follow-up plan, whether there's CAPAs involved or not. And then obviously, to me, whether it's an opening meeting, but in this perspective, a closed meeting or an audit closed meeting, make sure that when you wrap up, you have the ability to go back and forth, almost like a live version of a post-audit questionnaire, making sure that that communication is there. Now, what I tried to do here, not only through my own experiences, but from some research I did, what are some best practices that we're talking about? And you've heard most of these already as I've talked, but I really kind of wanted to put a bow on the idea of best practices here. And I think a lot of that pre-work is incredibly important. Making sure that you're getting that information up front that will allow the remote audit to be more enhanced and successful for both parties, making sure that confidentiality is in place. Any type of documents that need to be executed, please make sure that those are done before the audit starts. So you're not put in a situation where you're halfway through the audit and you realize you're missing something and it puts everything in jeopardy. Making sure that everybody understands the remote capabilities, what techniques you're going to be using, what procedures you're going to be using. Very, very important. But again, that comes down to communication. I'll say it again. It's probably the single biggest thing that makes remote audits work. Some of the other things that I want to touch on very quickly is the organization. Make sure that the auditor is incredibly ready. Let's face it, there's probably going to have to be a learning curve for the auditor too when it comes to remote audits. But as they start doing more and more of them, they'll quickly become an expert. But again, being able to be organized during a remote audit makes it much easier. In many cases, you might not have the situation where you're doing an on-site audit and you can, instinctively turn around to somebody and say, hey, can you show me this? So sometimes that organization becomes incredibly important because you don't have some of the on-site flexibility that you normally would have. Not that remote audits don't have flexibility, they do. We saw it in a previous slide. Whether it's scheduling flexibility, whether it's time bandwidth flexibility, whatever it might be. There's flexibility on both ends of the spectrum, but I want you to be aware of some of those things that you won't have during a traditional on-site audit that you need to compensate for. And then the last thing really is to make sure that the sharing method, and this goes back to the portal agreement, is really functioning properly. Again, I think we've all gotten used to this idea of the virtual world and doing Zoom meetings, doing whatever more WebEx meetings. And I'm sure we've all had the experience of being on a quote remote call or a virtual call or with 5, 6, 7 other people, and the internet goes down or the portal fails. Things like that happen. So make sure that again, and those are sometimes things you can't control, but what's in your power, make sure that you're understanding of the IT tool that you're using. I did want to leave you today with a case study. It goes back to that concept of painting a picture, and really what I want to take a look at is how our organization RX360 has started to look at remote audits and some of the things that we have put into place that we believe are important. And you will see some moments here over the next few slides that model what we've already talked about. So please, in a mindset of, hey, I've built that foundation for you. Let's see how that foundation works in a case study or a model that's out there in the marketplace already. And I like to put a moniker on different things. So for our model here at RX360, I look at it from a perspective of three P's plus a C: prerequisites, pre-audit prep, and process, and then the C is the checklist. To me, those are the important things when it comes to a remote audit. Looking at those early things, preparing as best as you can, understanding the process. Are you going to be able to meet all your compliance objectives with a remote audit that everything 100% is remote, or do you have to potentially look at that model where it's split a little bit, where 80% of it can be accomplished remote, but 20% of it might have to be an on-site follow-up? And then again, the biggest thing to me is making sure that you are understanding of the checklist. The things that you're going to be auditing against, are they synonymous with what you would be able to do in an on-site environment, or does it have to be adjusted? Some of those prerequisites we've always looked at that are incredibly important, and I don't don't want to minimize anything, but these are very specific. These are things that we've looked at RX360. The security around interactive communication. If we're going to be using Zoom, Make sure it's not the kind of the open portal Zoom. Make sure it's a security password. Make sure it's an upgraded version where you have all of those security features. There's other platforms out there that are incredibly good. Again, focused on security. Make sure that your communication portal from an information and communication technology standpoint is secure. The last thing you want to be doing is conducting an audit in a remote capability that's in an open public forum. So make sure that that security is there. Verify things like live camera if it's going to be used, secure documentation and sharing. Do you need to set up some type of a shared drive that is confidential and can only be shared between two organizations? Take a look at the things like that. Also, the ability to upload documents, especially where you might be doing an audit where internet bandwidth might not be what it is in other areas. Here in the United States, I like to think we have quality internet bandwidth, but there might be other areas in the world that you're trying to audit, and they might not have the same internet capabilities. Whether it's Wi-Fi, whether it's hardwired, whatever it might be, you want to take a look to make sure they have the ability to do what you need to do from an IT perspective. And again, I can't stress it enough, the idea of confidentiality, making sure from a prerequisite standpoint, even before you start getting into pre-audit questionnaires or anything like that, that CDAs are in place, all those permissions are in place. Verify if video and voice recording is even allowed. Do you have to have a separate agreement around that? And then obviously, what do you do with the information once the audit is over? That needs to be decided up front, and that's something that we've looked very closely here at RX360. Pre-audit preparation, we talked a little bit about this, but our model here at RX360 is not so much different than the foundation that we built earlier in the presentation. Whether it's pre-reading and understanding floor plans, QMS related documents, validation reports, all those documents that we ask for up front. Technology check, we've said that about 50 times already during the presentation, but it's important. It's kind of the backbone of a remote audit. Taking a look at what everybody's expectations are. Are there special requests from an auditor perspective, from an auditee perspective? Take a look at what those expectations and really exceptions are in some cases. We live in a world where every audit is not exactly the same because of different needs. So make sure that those needs are fleshed out early on. And one of the easiest ways to do it is develop a pre-audit questionnaire for both the auditee and an auditor to actually be able to communicate in a formal fashion and be able to document some of those needs up front. Incredibly important. And again, lends to that idea of communication. I mentioned it earlier. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to this idea of doing a remote audit and meeting needs and expectations. You can potentially conduct a remote audit where you meet all of your compliance objectives, meet all the checklist objectives, be able to do everything, where the remote audit, excuse me, is 100% of the audit. You may also have to look at a model where you can't do everything remotely and you have to do a follow-up where maybe some of it is on site. There's a lot of upsides and downsides there. You may be able to get a more robust audit with the mixed package. That may be more of geared towards some of your primary suppliers. But ultimately, you want to make sure what works for your organization and what puts you in a position of having the audit accepted both internally and externally. So again, there's two different ways to look at it, whether it's a mix of remote and on-site or whether it's just 100% remote. So I really encourage you to do your homework to make sure that you're meeting your organization's needs as well as any external parties that you might be working with that need to have access to the audit. I mentioned earlier, I want to kind of circle back to it now, but it's the idea of making sure that your your checklist meets your needs, and these checklists very well could be altered when it comes to doing an on-site audit versus a remote audit. I've put an example here of what RX360 looked at when it came to our checklist, or a snapshot of our checklist when it comes to basic chemicals and raw materials. And we went through an exercise of, what can be done remotely, what can be done on site. So we knew what we were dealing with, and really take a look at what missing pieces of the puzzle can we compensate for those, what it looks like, our auditors and auditees all accepting of any alterations to a checklist. This kind of just gives you a snapshot of an exercise that we went through, but you really have to look at what that impact is, how that checklist could change if you move to a remote audit. Here's something that's very important to think about too, is if you've had an on-site audit scheduled and you put yourself in a position where, due to coronavirus, travel restrictions in place, you now can't do that on-site audit, and you have to replace it with a remote audit if everybody's accepting of that. Well, one of the challenges there is you've already, as part of the on-site audit, probably agreed upon a scope of work, agreed upon a lot of that pre-audit information. That's going to now change with the remote perspective. So think about that, because that's going to be some new preparation time that maybe you weren't prepared for. So again, please keep in those type of things in mind, that when you move to remote, yes, things change, but that's the kind of world we live in, and we can all be successful if we're just prepared for that change. Now, I really want to wrap things up here. Again, before I kind of get into my end piece of the puzzle here, I do again want to thank everyone at CPHI China. It's a conference that I believe brings great ideas to people and allows them to really absorb information, install best practices at their own companies. So again, thank you very much to CPHI China. Thank you for everybody that logged in. My email is here. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to answer any questions. I know being able to conduct these conferences, these presentations remotely, whether they're pre-recorded, it's not something that's optimum, but it still allows us to share information within the industry, which helps us all evolve, stay ahead of the curve, and be able to meet our organization's needs, and continuing to improve, whether it's patient safety, whether it's looking at quality within our organizations, we improve our industry. So I encourage everyone, if you have an opportunity to look at virtual conferences, to look at virtual education, please do it. Whether it's pre-recorded material, whether it's live material, it's a great way to continue to up-educate yourself. It's just kind of a new way of doing things. But to really conclude, leave you with some thoughts that I personally have in regards to this is, I'll start it by saying, because it's not one of my bullets here, but don't forget about the importance of communication when it comes to remote audits. They really are here to stay. We're not going to come out of COVID-19 and be in a situation where, okay, I'm not doing remote audits anymore. I really believe that they're here to stay as part of everybody's audit plan, not only from a standpoint of helping with scheduling, on the supplier end, but helping on budgets, helping on human resource capital. I think it'll make the auditing environment throughout our industry much more streamlined, much more efficient, and ultimately will be better for it. Make sure that you're always focusing on best practices, getting better. I don't think that we're even at the tip of the iceberg yet when it comes to what's the best way to do a remote audit. We're truly still in learning mode, even though we're all actively doing it. We're in learning mode, and the best practices a year from now are going to look much different. So please keep that in mind. How do we continue to improve the concept of remote auditing? And really amongst yourselves, I encourage everybody to share ideas. Being able to utilize mistakes, being able to utilize successes that people have had when it comes to remote audits makes us all better. So please share ideas, make this concept of remote auditing something that will become incredibly important for the industry if it isn't already, and put us all in a position of being able to, really increase, pay attention to, and ensure patient safety. Because ultimately, as everybody knows, when I talk to them about RX360, or really the industry as a whole, ultimately everything that we do on a daily basis is because of patients. So this is just another way of ensuring patient safety. So again, thank you very much for your time today. It was an absolute pleasure being able to provide this to you. I look forward to any interaction post the conference. And if there's anything that I can do or RX360 can do for anybody, please don't hesitate to reach out. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe and healthy, and I look forward to seeing you in person soon.